I think Harvard is still looking for basically the same things it had before. A lot of people are talking about the change of essays, but at the end of the day, I think they're still looking for a leader who has made an impact, who is able to grow in whatever circumstances or environment they have developed. So I don't see that as a big difference. The way that you have to communicate that information is now different. But I think the criteria kind of stays the same, or basically the same as before.
Welcome to Admission Straight Talk, the podcast dedicated to graduate admissions and helping you approach the application process thoughtfully and successfully. Your host is Accepted's founder and world-renowned admissions guru, Linda Abraham. At Accepted, our mission is to get you to that unforgettable moment when you read your acceptance email and shout, "Yes, I'm in!" confident you'll be attending the perfect program to help you launch the career of your dreams.
Welcome to the 585th episode of Admission Straight Talk. Thanks for tuning in. Are you applying to Harvard and other top MBA programs? We have a panel discussion today focused on the changes to the Harvard Business School application. If you like what you hear, I invite you to check out Accepted Services and take advantage of our free consultation offer. It's like a free sample, if you will. You can request any of our panelists to provide the free consultation and potentially work with you on your application. To sign up for your free call, please provide the information requested at www.accepted.com/MBA free call. Our panelists today are Esmeralda Cardenal, former director of admissions at top MBA programs and an experienced Accepted MBA admissions consultant, and Kelly Wilson, former admissions director and dean, and now an experienced Accepted MBA admissions consultant. Now, you're both repeat guests on Admission Straight Talk, so welcome back to Admission Straight Talk.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I'm delighted you can both join me. So, Harvard Business School has changed things up this year. I found 3 changes. It's completely rewrote its criteria, completely changed its essay questions, and added a written test requirement for those taking the GMAT Focus, which is currently the only GMAT exam available for applicants. To me, the most significant, and I might add underrated change, is a change for the criteria. The new essay questions are getting all the attention, and they are certainly important and deserving of attention, but the application is more than just the essay questions. So I'd like to start with the criteria. I'm going to share my screen now so everybody can see the criteria, and we're going to go over them. I'm going to not read the whole thing. It's on the screen for viewers to read, but for listeners, I'm going to just read what I think are the most important part. Business-minded. We are looking for individuals who are passionate about using business as a force for good, who strive to improve and transform companies, industries, and the world. We are seeking those who are eager to solve today's biggest problems and shape the future through creative and integrated thinking. Being business-minded is about the interest to help organizations succeed, whether in the private, public, or nonprofit sector. This business inclination can be found in individuals with a variety of backgrounds. In your application, we are looking for evidence of your interpersonal skills, quantitative abilities, and the ways in which you plan to create impact through business in the future. The second criterion is leadership focused, to lead others towards making a difference in the world, and those who recognize that to build and sustain successful organizations, they must develop and nurture diverse teams. Leadership takes many forms in many contexts. You do not have to have a formal leadership role to make a difference. What I'm looking for in your application, your leadership impact may be most evident in extracurriculars, community initiatives, or your professional work. Growth-oriented. Individuals who desire to broaden their perspective through creative problem solving, active listening, and lively discussion. Our case and field-based learning methods depend on the active participation of curious students who are excited to listen and learn from faculty and classmates, as well as contribute their own ideas and perspectives. In your application, we will look for the ways in which you have grown, developed, and how you engage in the world around you. So, panelists, what do you think of the new criteria? Esme, you want to start?
I think Harvard is still looking for basically the same things it had before. A lot of people are talking about the change of essays, but at the end of the day, I think they're still looking for a leader who has made an impact, who is able to grow in whatever circumstances or environment they have developed. So I don't see that as a big difference. The way that you have to communicate that information is now different. But I think the criteria kind of stays the same, or basically the same as before. With that in mind, I think that even if the essay questions are shorter, a lot of people have said, "Oh, the new essay questions don't lead to deep introspection, etc." But I would actually disagree with that, because since the criteria is the same, they're still looking for these three key areas. You still need to do deep introspection to make sure that you fit, that you have stories like that align, and then you're able to answer then the essay questions subsequently.
I think deep introspection certainly is a big part of this. But Kelly, what do you want to add to Esme's comments?
Yeah, so the way I was thinking about this, I agree that I don't think they're that different. And what I looked at was, the old criteria, and then I looked at the section in your application will look for. And there's a lot of parallels there. And so I agree that it's positioned differently with the business-minded, leadership-focused, growth-oriented. But once you dig into what they're looking for, I think it's very similar.
I agree with you. There are some differences. I think there's a greater emphasis on diversity here in different forms. I also think that they're a little bit more Stanford-like, frankly, in their focus on change. I visited a professor at Harvard Business School several years ago, and we were talking to somebody I know socially. And at one point he asked me, "What do you see as the common thread in your clients who are accepted to Harvard Business School?" And I thought for a minute, gee, that's a tough question. And I said, leadership and impact. And he smiled and the conversation moved on. And then at the end of it, I said, wait a minute, what do you see as the common thread in your students? I mean, as many clients as we've had accepted to Harvard Business School, he's certainly still seen a lot more Harvard Business School students than I had. And he smiled again and he said, I was smiling because I was thinking the same. That's what I see as the main common thread among all our students. They're incredibly diverse in where they've led and where they've had that impact, but they're all leaders who've had impact. So again, that conversation was several years ago, but given how slowly schools change, I don't think has changed or is going to change. So
what did you mean when you said you see more about diversity here?
I don't remember the word diverse appearing in the old criteria.
Okay.
But here it talks about leadership takes many forms and many contexts.
I see.
They must develop and nurture diverse teams. We deliberately create a class that includes different kinds of leaders, from the frontline manager to the startup founder to the behind the scenes thought leader. Where else did I see it? We are looking for individuals who desire to broaden their perspectives through creative problem solving, active listening, and lively discussions. You can't have a lively discussion if you can always have, the kind of tunnel vision that we so often get on social media, where everybody is on a particular channel or thread and they're all agreeing with each other and nobody's having any kind of thoughtful exchange of differing opinions. Yeah. So that's kind of where I was seeing it.
Okay. And the reason I asked is because I would say, I think, and I'm curious if you all agree, given that the Supreme Court decision no longer allows admissions to include the factor of race, I think schools needed to find a way to invite examples that might incorporate aspects of diversity that will be able to convey different experiences that people have. And so I'm glad you pointed that out, because that was something that I think is an interesting part of the shorter questions and the more specific prompts. But I'm getting ahead of ourselves, maybe.
No, I think you're making a very valid point. Thank you. Yeah. I think that the main reason I wanted to start with the criteria is I think applicants need to know that when they're filling these applications out, it's not just the essays. As important as the essays are, it's the boxes too. Yeah. So when they're asking about your family background, if you come from a disadvantaged background, and you've now made it to Harvard or Yale or whatever, or you're a top student at whatever university you're at, well, that's a sign of growth.
Yeah.
And I think that's a key point here. So when you're, whether you're filling out and in terms of the post MBA goal, what kind of impact do you hope to have? All right, fine. Maybe your short-term post MBA goal is to get a job in XYZ, but that's not really impact, right? That's getting a job. How do you see it going beyond? They might even have changed that to post MBA aspiration. I'd have to look. But an aspiration also implies that it's something a little bit beyond your reach. It's beyond the immediate job and source of income. So I really wanted to start with the what are we looking for, which is, who are we looking for? Because I think that should inform how applicants respond to the entire application.
Great.
All right. So how can applicants show these qualities throughout the application?
What I would say is not only the essays.
Yeah.
It's not only the essays. So it is very, very important that the resume tells a story as well. Usually, for a lot of the times, and that's what happened when I was admissions director, the resume will be the very first thing that you read. And if the resume is vague or doesn't really convey that many accomplishments or impact, then I would kind of glanced over a little bit quicker than if the resume had a lot of meat, a lot of information in there. And I think it should tell the same story that you're telling in the essays. And then also the letters of recommendation should also corroborate the story you're telling, the growth mindset, how great of a leader you are, and how you've led, and how you have turned around from a situation of weakness, let's say, or a room for improvement, and things like that, and your business mindset. So I think that those two things need to, of course, talk, and besides everything else, besides the career aspirations and everything. So you have to still think through the criteria as you prepare every item of the application.
Agreed. And Kelly, do you have anything to add there?
Yeah, I would just add, again, I agree with Esme in terms of how she's talking about the component parts. I do think that there is an initial inclination anyway, just to focus on the essay, because doesn't that feel like the biggest part of the application where candidates are conveying who they are and what they've done? The reality is every piece of that application is perspective of that person, and those components should work together for sure. And an applicant should step back and make sure that the full application in the holistic aspect of it conveys a cohesive story. And so it's beyond just looking at what are the essay questions.
In terms of the resume or the work history or the activity history, which are, probably the meatier parts of the boxes, if you will. I mentioned the post MBA goal. I mentioned the family background also. And as we mentioned, the resume. What are some of the pitfalls that applicants need to avoid in completing those parts of the application? Kelly, you want to start with that one?
Yeah, sure. I think, I kind of alluded to what I'm about to say here, but I think a pitfall is to think about, for an applicant to think about their candidacy as it just kind of in one lane, when the reality is they need to think about it from these varying perspectives. And there's not one right answer or one right type of experience for someone to draw on. And I think authenticity is something that candidates should strive for as they're pulling together all of the components of their application to demonstrate who they are.
Sounds good. Esme, do you have anything to add?
I would say that a common pitfall that I see over and over again is, and Kelly had touched a little bit on this before, is the overemphasis on the essays and the underemphasis on the other parts of the application. So oftentimes I see clients rushing through the application boxes because they feel that it's less important. And these are just as important. And so I would say that that's a common thing that you have to, I make my clients all, once they have decided to apply to school, to create an account and go in and start filling the personal information part of the application for two reasons. One, so they can start receiving the communications from the school. But the second reason is like, so they are aware of the length of the portal and how many questions they have to answer and give themselves time to answer each one of those questions. I think those questions, plus the essays, the resume, and every item of the application, it is a whole, conveys all the story. So there are parts of your background that you might not be able to, answer them in the essays, but that you will be able to, for reasons for leaving a job or gaps in your resume or any other parts of extracurricular activities or things like that you can actually explain in the application boxes, but you need to spend time on them, especially because they are so limited in characters and in wording.
Right. The only thing I would add to what you both have said is in terms of the resume and the work and activity history sections, don't just describe what you did, describe the impact that you had, the change you made. And both Kelly and Esmeralda have said the achievements, the accomplishments that you had, the leadership roles you had. And admittedly, you don't have a lot of room. So to the extent possible, quantify, because that's one very succinct way to highlight not just what you did, but what you've done, what you've accomplished. Again, the results that you've achieved. It's not just about your responsibilities, it's about results. And that's the kind of impact that Harvard wants to see in those sections. And that can really, again, help you bring out and show that you have the business-minded focus, the leadership focus, and the growth mentality that Harvard is looking for. Now that we've focused on the other parts of the application, let's turn to the essays because they are still important. We don't want to say that they're not important. We just don't want listeners to underestimate the importance of the other parts of the application. So let's turn to the essay questions, and I'm going to go to the Harvard page with the essay questions and also read them for those people who are just listening to the podcast. And the podcast is also on YouTube if anybody wants to watch it. The first one is business-minded essay. Please reflect on how your experiences have influenced your career choices and aspirations and the impact you will have on the businesses, organizations, and communities you plan to serve. The leadership-focused essay, what experiences have shaped who you are, how you invest in others, and what kind of leader you want to become. And C, the growth-oriented essay, curiosity can be seen in many ways. Please share an example of how you have demonstrated curiosity and how that has influenced your growth. The first question very generously allows you 300 words. The second two questions are 250 words each maximum. Okay, so let's unpack these. Okay, you have the business-minded essay. These are definitely questions that reflect the criteria we just discussed. And how about suggestions for approaching these essays? Esme, you want to start with that one?
Sure. So for the business-minded essay, first of all, keep in mind that you're going to have also the career aspirations essay, which is, I believe, 500 characters long. So you don't want to repeat that information there. So what I would do is, first of all, they're asking for a reflection of your experiences, not for your experience, but experiences. I would provide a short summary of those experiences, how they have influenced your career, and then focus more on, I would say, the impact that you would have in the mid to long term. Because if career aspirations are going to have your short term, you're going to decide what you're going to do after the MBA, role, industry, etc. I would not talk about those in this essay. You only have 300 words, but should be maybe a reflection of what you've done up to now and what you plan to do later on in the future and the anticipated impact that you see coming in. I see this as kind of a goal essay, but taking in mind that you're going to have another goals essay, very short and to the point in the form. So you have to kind of manage those two in.
Okay, great. Kelly, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I would just add, as you think about your experiences and you think about how did that change you? How did that shape you? And the word influenced here is all of us have life experiences that, direct us forward, and we get to decide how we use that life experience in the choices we make. And I think it's really important to understand that it is because of your experiences that you think about things in the way you do. And I agree that the forward-looking, conversation around the impact that the candidate plans to have in the, business, organizations, or community is the forward-looking is I would say, most important part of this essay.
Yeah, I would agree. What I found kind of interesting is the use of the word business, because they're quite clear that it doesn't apply just to for-profit entities.
Mm-hmm.
So I was kind of wondering, well, what makes, if you're not talking about a for-profit entity, what makes it business?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, my idea was it was efficient use of resources, whether they be human or physical. It may not be maximizing profit. It might be just maximizing assets.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what you thought about that. Yeah. Organization, again, which probably ties into leadership, but I would not use the same example. Also, in realistically speaking, if you have only 300 words, I don't think you can talk about too many experiences.
No.
Right. Maybe one or two to start with, and then go on to the choices you've made and the impact you intend to have as you serve businesses, organizations, and communities. All right, let's go to the leadership focused essay. And Kelly, you want to start with that one?
Sure. I mean, again, we're drawing on the experiences and how that has changed who we are or helped define who we are. I think here it's important to really think about opportunities to lead, whether it's formal or informal. How have you made someone's life better, invested in others? And so to demonstrate that you have an idea of how this kind of investment should work, but then going beyond again to how do you want to further develop? Right. So some applicants will not have as much experience in formal leadership, at least. But certainly with coming to business school, have an idea of going, forward into their career and thinking about how they want to be known as a leader and what kind of leadership traits that as an applicant you want to carry through your career, I think is an important thing to share here.
Sounds good. Esme, do you have anything to add?
I think it's very important that they say back to the criteria that it doesn't matter if they have had or not a formal leadership role. And that is a big question that I see coming up and again from my clients when they said, oh, I am not a project manager. Oh, I don't have this role. I'm working with a client right now whose role is software engineer too, whatever that is. I mean, but he has had not only promotions, but also leads team in different countries, etc. So he is a leader, whether his role and that directly, he has no one that he is supervising directly, but he's still a leader. So I think you have to keep that in mind in terms of when they talk about leadership focus. A lot of people say, oh, I haven't had leadership, or no, maybe you do. So let's explore what you have done. Also, I think that a lot of questions we have to kind of, raise to ourselves, answering the essays about this, to answer this essay. For instance, when have I been a source of inspiration to others? How others took my initiative, my ideas and rolled with it. What happened to those things? I think it is good to recognize if you have been a leader already, if you're already being the leader that you want to be, and say what other areas you would like to develop to be even a stronger leader. So I think it's a lot of asking questions about how your experiences, especially if you haven't had a formal leadership role, and be able to put that into paper in terms of saying how that has shaped you and where you want to go from there.
Really, I agree with both of you. I just want to add a couple of points. And I think, Esme, you were touching on this. Years ago, I heard I was at a class that has nothing to do with admissions. And the speaker was speaking about the difference between leadership by status and leadership by stature. Okay. And you can also say leadership by virtue of talent or by virtue of title, by virtue of character or connections, contacts. If you are a leader by virtue of title, you might want to touch on how you earned that title. And again, you don't have to touch on it in all places, but you can touch on it in different places. Some of these things in different places so that you're not repeating yourself. How did you get the title? What have you done with it? How have you nurtured and empowered those people working with you or under you? Also, quantify how many people you've led. Now, if you led a baseball team, then people will know that there were 9. Most people will know, not all people will know that there are 9 people on the team, and there are other people on the team. I think a professional baseball team has 25 people. Somebody can correct me if I'm wrong. I'm not a big sports fan. So make sure you say how many people you actually led. You might want to touch on what you did to get the title, or again, how you've used it. If you've led by virtue of character, stature, and talent, well, then again, you may not have the title, but you certainly, as Esme said, are a leader. So again, what have you done to assume that responsibility? And what have you done with it? My son years ago was on the yearbook committee at his high school. And he found the program they were using, I think it was Photoshop or some Photoshop type program, really, really fascinating. And he and the professional that was guiding them, who was selling them the service basically, was urging all members on the yearbook committee to learn the program. Well, he sat down every night and worked to master this program. The person who was initially chosen to be the chair of the yearbook committee, this was in high school, by the way, he didn't. And the yearbook fell behind. And my son, who's a fairly quiet guy, not flashy, not your rah-rah kind at all, he'd learned the program. So he was helping everybody on the committee. And when the chair, who had been elected and selected, finally admitted he wasn't capable of leading it, they all chose my son, because he's the one who'd applied himself, mastered the tool. And yes, they did get it done in time for graduation, which was a big, big, big question at the time. But that was a case of where somebody was leading and chosen to be a leader by virtue of what he had done. So those are some things that, I assume that applicants to Harvard would have more current examples than something from their senior year of high school. But that is an example of, a very simple example of somebody who assumed a leadership role based on what he had done by virtue of his character and his diligence. So keep that in mind. Again, you want to provide examples, whether you have a title or not, how you got the title, how you've used the title to empower others, and also remember to indicate somewhere, not in all places, but somewhere, how many people you've led. All right, so let's go on to the growth-oriented essay. Curiosity can be seen in many ways. Please share an example of how you have demonstrated curiosity and how that has influenced your growth. That's up to 250 words. Esme, you want to start with that one?
Yeah, so I would recommend, if you use professional examples for the first 2, this is a great way to use a personal example so the admissions committee gets to know you. I would also try to use the STAR method, the situation, task, action, results, just to keep it focused, on how you've grown, what the situation has, how you've grown, and the results that came from it. Definitely keeping like the curiosity and the passions in mind as you do this. I would say be creative in terms of, this is a way, your time to shine in terms of sharing with the admissions committee who you are, what you do. For instance, if you are an engineer and have worked in engineering, maybe this should be something about completely different that is not, let's say. So I would say to just keep that in mind. You don't want to talk about the same things, and each essay, even if you use different examples, you want to change it a little bit. And also, ideally, always keeping the growth mindset, how you've grown. So that's why I think that you have to have a cause and effect or a STAR method where you present the before and the after, and so that they can clearly see how you've grown.
Kelly, anything to add?
Yeah, just to maybe underscore a little bit of what Esme said. the idea of being able to choose an example that might be a little bit different. I think this is the easiest place to I think be creative with the answer. I'm thinking about a client that I've worked with who had an engineering background and was also a piano player. So he had this right brain, left brain thing going on, which I thought was really interesting. And he talked about wanting to learn more about this one particular composer and spending his time doing that. He was able to convey kind of how that curiosity, that desire to learn more about something that he didn't know about in terms of being a pianist really rounded out this art form that he really has loved. And so to me, that's an example that you could expand on that would, be very different than a work example. But also, I think that the idea of really being motivated and underscoring the curiosity, I think could lead to a really interesting example here.
Yeah, I agree. I also like the idea of using this for a non-work, especially if the other two essays are professional, a non-work activity. Again, going back to the diversity point that we made earlier. Curiosity can be seen in many ways. I also want to point out that this is one essay where Harvard says, please share an example, one example. So I think that Esme's and Kelly's point about using the STAR or CAR approach, they only want one example here. It makes storytelling much easier. So that's great points. The word limits are really tight. And we just pointed out that, we're discussing that, but how can applicants work with these questions, which are quite specific, despite the fact that Susie Welch said they're vague, to fully answer them, stick close to the word limits, at the same time, reveal fit with Harvard Business School and something distinctive about themselves? I think, we've been touching on this question, but maybe we can dive into it a little bit more. I mean, everybody's going to be writing about leadership. Everybody's going to be writing about business orientation. Everybody's going to be writing about growth. So how can you also, and I think Esme's last example and Kelly's last example gave you a little bit of idea, but can we go into that a little bit more? I think the old question was allowed for more individuality than these questions do.
Yeah.
But we still, Harvard still wants this diverse class. It still wants this different perspective. It wants the lively discussion. How can they be individuals given the tight word limits and the more directed questions in this application?
So first of all, I think that there are a lot of people saying that these new essay questions don't allow for deep introspection. I actually disagree. They are just differently. They are different. They're shorter, but you still need to do the introspection in order to answer them. We'd accepted. I really love the questionnaire that we give out to our new clients because it allows them to really do that introspection and put down in the screen and then paper, what they've done, achievements, everything. I mean, we ask this question, we kind of lead the client to answer this question for this introspection to happen. So I think that is a very, very important that you need to do to answer these essays. And my very first advice would be, you want to write more before you write less. Don't attempt to write your first draft of 250 words and write 250 words because it is going to be nearly impossible. And if you get to do it more often than that, you won't be saying anything because people get to be so focused on saying very little that you ended up saying very little of everything. So what I would say is write freely, answer the question freely first. And then once you have the example and you have all the items in the example, then that's when you start cutting it down until you take out all the fats and leave it to 300 or 250 words. So that would be my actually very first advice on how to approach these essays. Kelly, I'm sure you have more.
Kelly, go ahead.
Yeah, no, not at all. So I'm thinking, Esme, back to an answer you gave earlier, which was to make sure that your clients are starting an application early and really understanding what all of the questions within the application are asking. And that's kind of where I was thinking of from the standpoint is start with the end in mind as you're getting ready to think about essays. Step back and think about, what does the rest of the application tell HBS about you? And what are the things that they don't yet know that could differentiate you? And then prioritize those things by which would give you, or which would give them insights into who you are and how the program will be better because you're there as a student and as an alum. And exactly what you said, Esme, I would start by answering without considering the word count. And then I think the first edit is one of the first things to do is to think about what detail can be rolled up and what detail is critical to leave, in terms of getting to that word count. And then when the even the first round of editing is done, let's make sure that we go back to that beginning and the things that you want to make sure that you're conveying, that they weren't edited out because we're rolling some of the detail up. I think that's the challenge with the shorter essays, for sure, is to be able to tell the story you want to tell and convey the appropriate detail where it's needed.
Yeah, I think you're both giving great suggestions. What I sometimes recommend applicants do is list, you can just notes. I'm not talking about essays or full sentences. List the things you want the school to know, in this case, Harvard to know, and then look at the places you're going to have to show them, whether the resume, the work history, the activity history, the essays, and fill it in. Again, this is for you, so that there's minimal overlap. What are you going to put here? What are you going to put here? What are you going to highlight here? What are you going to spotlight there? And that way there's minimal overlap and the reader is getting the fullest picture of the applicant. Given Harvard's desire to have this diverse class, you want to highlight your multidimensionality so that you're not just going to be in one bucket, you're going to fill several buckets and several different needs that they want to have in their class, or labels that they want to have in their class, assuming they're looking for that. That's one point I wanted to make. And then there's also just mechanics in writing that will put your writing on a diet. Give it Ozempic, okay? So what is that? Use the active voice. Very simple, very basic in terms of concise writing, more vigorous writing. If you write "the boy threw the ball" or "the ball was thrown by the boy," the latter is the passive voice, and it's much, much wordier than "the boy threw the ball." The boy threw the ball, 5 words. The ball was thrown by the boy, 7 words. It's almost 50% more. You don't want that. Use the active voice. There's also lots of things you can do in terms of putting your writing on a diet. Did you come to the conclusion that something happened, or did you conclude? Did you make a decision, or did you decide? If you can use a verb where there are nouns, you are almost always making your writing more concise. So there's other tricks like that. He went in a hurry, or he hurried. Any of those things will just make your writing more concise and allow you to reveal more about your experience and qualifications. All right, let's move on. So what do you think will be the impact of the new, well, I guess we really touched on this a little bit. Do you think these are going to be easier or harder for applicants this year than the one long question that they had previously? Any idea? Kelly, you want to start with that one?
Sure. So, as I was thinking about the impact of the new essay questions from the school's perspective, I think it's a much more directed prompt that likely will give them specific information that they're seeking, right? And so the broader, longer essay would, it allows for more leeway. And many schools are going to several short essays. I think back, when
except
I first
for Chicago Booth went the other way.
Oh, well, except for, okay. I was just looking at a couple of other schools that have done the same thing. And so I think that in some respects it's harder, but I think now that we have the tip of putting your writing on a diet, it's super helpful. But I do think it's harder to convey a story with fewer words because you may not be able to be as descriptive. And I think this is, where we can help candidates as they're really going through this essay process help them to achieve the essay that they'd like to have at the end.
Yeah.
Esme?
What I would say is, yes, it's easier to come up with examples. I mean, they're pretty much asking you, to what you need to write about. So the part of not knowing what to write about, of course, you don't have to worry about that anymore. So that's easier. What I think is harder is to stand out, because everybody's going to be writing about leadership. Everybody's going to be writing about growth. So how do you stand out from everybody else, especially if you have an overrepresented background, in terms of industry focus, etc. So how do you stand out? And I think that's going to be the key here. And that's what I think you have to, but if you keep if you still do your introspection, and if you have story what you want to say, and diversify what you're going to say, where, like you said, Linda, I think that you will be able to still convey it. But if you just approach the essays, okay, I'm going to find examples for this and just write the essays without thinking about other parts of the application, then I think you might have a harder time standing out from everybody else who's doing exactly the same.
Agree. Yeah, agreed. I do think they're much more directed. I also think that interesting. You're saying that the more conventional applicant is going to have a harder time standing out. I would say the more distinctive applicant is going to have a harder time standing out, because there's fewer places to show that distinctiveness. Thinking of some of the older Harvard essay questions. But I think the bottom line is everybody's going to have a hard time standing out because the questions are so focused and so short. But that's, I think, going to be the challenge with this set of questions. Yes. I think on one hand, as you said, Kelly, I think it means that Harvard is probably going to get answers that are giving it more of what it wants, as opposed to the more open-ended question that was there previously. Now, the last major change in Harvard's application is the requirement for applicants who are taking the GMAT Focus, if invited to interview, to also take a writing assessment. Why do you believe Harvard is adding this requirement? And do you think more applicants are going to take the GRE as a result?
I mean, I'm already recommending as a consultant my clients to take the GRE over the GMAT, just because it is less costly and they don't have to spend not only time and money in getting the writing, the GMAT writing assessment. So I think that's something that GMAT, I think it is considering and talking with HBS at the moment. I believe MIT is another school that is asking for that. So I would say, I think it's a mistake, the GMAT made. And I think it might be a year before that is fixed, because people have to decide what test to take. So I think that's what that's what it is. How about you, Kelly?
Yeah, I agree. It's surprising on one hand that the folks at the Graduate Management Admission Council didn't anticipate this as a potential issue, or maybe they did, and that was the risk they were willing to take. But the analytical writing, or the writing component of the GRE, it's the one piece of the application that is certain to be written by the applicant. Right. So schools don't look at it as a polished piece of writing, but it certainly does provide AdCom with a check of writing skills if that's something that they need. And so on one hand, I'm not surprised, that HBS is adding this requirement. I think there's more than one way to skin that cat, I guess, to use a phrase. Pure Talent also has a writing component that schools could use as well. And it just dawned on me, let me go back to say, so the Graduate Management Admission Council obviously have packaged the writing component as a separate tool. So perhaps they were thinking of it.
Yeah.
I wonder, obviously the GMAT Focus, the new GMAT, was in the works for a long time.
Yeah.
And AI kind of burst on the scene in November of 2022, about a year and a half ago, a little more than a year and a half ago. And by then, GMAT Focus was well into development.
Well underway.
Exactly. And I think a lot of the point of the GMAT Focus and the new GRE was to be friendlier to the test taker, shorter, frankly, easier, without being less predictive for the business schools. So I'm wondering if this was underway before AI burst on the scene and the possibility of AI written essays. So GMAC was basically figuring, well, this will sell us more GMAT tests basically, because it's not going to have the writing component and it's going to be shorter, and we're going to have, the other stuff is being tested and still predictive. And then, AI came, and suddenly it was like the schools felt like we really want a writing sample that we know they wrote.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I think they might have been
Absolutely
bested by,
Yeah.
kind of fooled by AI.
Yeah. I think you're absolutely right there. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's one more reason why your essays have to be genuine, have to, I would say, stay away from ChatGPT and AI at all parts. Spend time on your essays, spend time on your story, so they and try to be as genuine as possible, so that they don't sound like fabricated by an AI tool, basically.
Right. Good point.
Mm-hmm.
All right. What do you wish I would have asked you about the HBS application? Kelly, you want to start with that one?
I think we talked about it. What I had thought about is, just in terms of the Supreme Court decision and where people can draw on their life experiences. I think there is room in this new approach to the essay or essays. There is room to draw on those different life experiences. And I think that's the one component that, last summer, a lot of people were talking about the Supreme Court decision. The schools have had to work through that this past year. And we're seeing, as a result of that, through looking at the different applications, how different schools are dealing with, navigating that decision. And so this definitely is an important component, but I do think we touched on that for sure.
Okay, great. Esme?
I would say whether the question that we can discuss is whether the applicant pool would change as a result of this change in the essays.
Good question.
It's something I wonder myself, because now the essays are seemingly easier. And at least the large part of the applicant pool feel like, okay, these are essays that I can answer, because they are a little bit more similar to what the other business schools ask. In my experience, I've been doing this for almost 10 years. It's like I felt that applicants there is some sort of fear about facing the HBS essay, because, okay, I really want to apply to HBS, but where do I start? What do I say? What's unique about me? How do I convey this part of my background with the fact that I want an MBA program from Harvard? How do I do that? Every other school is asking me exactly, but this one. So I wonder if we're going to see an increase in applications just because of the sheer fact that the essay questions are easier to answer. And that, again, I don't have the answer to that question. My prediction is probably yes. And but it will be interesting, to see once the application deadlines, roll in and we see some data.
Do you think that was part of the motivation for the change?
Would be. They have change in their leadership. So you have a new dean that coming in, and they have, she has fresh ideas. Probably was a result of not only her, but maybe the whole committee's decision. Another thing could be a reason of a lot of, physical exhaustion when you're reading, as long essays year after year after year. It can be a little daunting. Also, the fact that as an admissions officer, you also want to make sure everybody kind of under the same rules and see, you want people that have a business mindset, that have leadership, that have growth. And if you don't ask those questions, you never, it's some people are not going to tell you those questions. They're going to talk about, something else. So I guess a lot of the things went into detail. Could be the application in light of changes, wanting to get more applicants could be one reason. I don't think it was the only reason why they did that, but could be one of them. Yeah.
Okay, great. Kelly, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I do find it interesting. On one hand, you think, why does HBS need more applicants?
Yeah.
But on the other hand, it's the composition of the applicant pool. And certainly people who, like you said, may have been intimidated by the much broader question, or maybe someone who just hasn't had the resources to invest in some of the activities that could help them prepare for this application, perhaps that will, allow them to be on the playing field.
Okay, great. Anything else you want to bring up before we bring this to a close?
What I would just say is don't take the essay changes and the shortness of the essays now, the requirements, as a hint that you don't need to do the deep introspection for HBS.
Yeah.
You still need to do just like you did before. You still need to come up with examples, and you need to come up with a story that tells, a whole story that tells that you're not repeating yourself or they're creating redundancies. They don't want to see the same story over and over again with different languages. And I think that you need to just do the deep introspection. And I would actually, invite you to come on board and work with us, even if it's just for the brainstorming session and getting that done, so that you can get some really good examples and really, put together a really compelling application. Mm-hmm.
Great idea. Kelly, any last thoughts?
I would just echo Esme and say that certainly knowing yourself and understanding what motivates you and what drives you is a key part of navigating the MBA admissions process in general, and certainly for the HBS application.
Great. Thank you. Thank you both, Kelly and Esmeralda. Listener, if you would like to learn more about our panelists, Esmeralda Cardenal and Kelly Wilson, we're going to include links to their bios and their contact me pages at www.accepted.com/585. And as I mentioned earlier, if you'd like to talk to them and have a free consultation, if you're interested in working with them, you can request them either from their bio pages or from www.accepted.com/MBA free call. Just complete the form and you'll be put in touch with them. Listener, thank you too for joining today's panel and me for our 585th episode. If you find the show worthwhile, I have a suggestion for you. Subscribe. That way you won't miss any of our future shows, whether with admissions directors, writing experts, test prep pros, fantastic admissions consultants, or alumni doing great things. You can find subscribe links in the show notes at www.accepted.com/585. Thanks again for coming. This is Admission Straight Talk produced by Accepted, and I am your host, Linda Abraham. I'll talk to you again next week.